Chapter 21 The Crimson Sun Rises. While waiting for the payment for the book to arrive, Anastasia focused on studying the Necromancer tome. Every now and then she went outside the walls to see how the teachings worked in practice. Slowly but surely, her effective range of control and speed increased. She also moved around larger masses of bone, and moved dozens of individual bones in intricate patterns to improve her level of control over material. None of this transferred terribly well over to controlling flesh, and Anastasia had been jumping over any chapters dealing with it. She knew she probably shouldn't have, but specializing in not touching the grosser parts of corpses felt like something she could pull off. Of course, it was a waste, like a skilled mage limiting themselves to only using basic spells, but projectile vomiting during combat wasn't exactly the best technique out there. Just like on the first 6, on the 7th morning after their quest, Anastasia was sitting at a table in the inn, drinking her morning coffee and flipping through the tome to looking for something new to focus on. None of her friends were awake yet, as they had no need to do more quests for a couple of weeks at least. Sleeping in had become a habit for them. Only Rosie was busy preparing for the breakfast rush, but still found the time to chat with Anastasia while refilling her cup. "You're really into that book, huh? Is it interesting?" the innkeeper asked while pouring Anastasia her third refill. The necromancer nodded. "Yeah, there's tons of helpful stuff in here, but some parts are just disgusting. Like this one, smearing blood over the bones you intend to use can increase the effectiveness of your grasp over them, even better if they have some of their original owner still stuck on them. It's really nice knowing that the insane person writing this is technically my ally. Better than having them be your enemy," Rosie pointed out. Anastasia closed the book and leaned back to rest her eyes. Mikhail's payment could arrive any day now, and she wanted to get the money to do some serious shopping, so she spent most of her time where she could be found by a courier. The others were happy with just the money from the quest and gems, so the party had decided that Anastasia would get to keep everything she got for the book. The tavern was almost empty, and aside from a couple of ratfolk adventurers in the corner table, Anastasia was the only patron there. It would be another half an hour or so before the other guests would start to drag themselves downstairs, and she had gotten her fill of pointlessly grotesque descriptions for the morning, so a quick walk seemed like a good idea. It was still dark outside, but the sun would rise any minute now, and Anastasia had always liked the sunrise. She put the book behind the counter and told Rosie her intentions before strolling outside. Anastasia greeted the guard stationed at the gate, and started to follow the wall to east. It was possible to navigate easily enough in the twilight, even without a lantern. She followed a well-traveled path that ran along the wall, close enough for her to touch the ancient stone surface. Almost right away, she noticed an unpleasant odor in the morning air, the unmistakable tang of flesh and blood she was far too familiar with. "That's weird," she muttered to herself and continued walking until her senses picked up something by the wall in the distance, something dead. Figuring it could have been a mealsome beast had forgotten there after being shooed away by the guards, the necromancer continued inching forwards. It didn't take long for that theory to get thrown out when she realized the sheer size of the mess ahead. The mass of gore was far larger than she had thought, at least 2 meters in height and twice that in width. The mountain of wet flesh appeared almost black in the darkness as it leaned against the wall, and Anastasia could only barely see it. Despite not feeling at all like she needed to see it and already gagging over the idea, she figured that it was wise to at least see what was up, so she could report it to the guards. "Please don't be people, please don't be people, please don't be people," she nervously repeated and uncovered the crystal in her lantern, and pointed it at the mass. Most of it was people. Hands and legs sticking out here and there, ripped skin and clothes. There was also at least a single sheep and probably a pig thrown into the mix. Anastasia backed off before she threw up, and a slight feeling of triumph came over her when she managed to keep her breakfast coffee inside her, but that didn't last for long as the sun finally came up and lit the field outside the wall. Anastasia decided to take a final glimpse of the pile of gore before reporting it to the guards. She turned around and immediately fell on her knees. Above the pile, the wall was drenched in blood, which Anastasia hadn't noticed it in the dark. Reaching from the top to the bottom of the 18-meter-high wall were bloody letters spelling out the word, or more accurately, the name Crimson. Possibly the worst part of the whole message was the heart-shaped dot over the letter I. The guard posted at the northern gate of Valor gazed at the beautiful sunrise that marked the end of his shift. The guard who was supposed to take up the post him had already arrived and was now doing some light warm-ups to wake himself up properly. Looks like the weather's going to be good again. The guard retiring for the day said and yawned. Yup, perfect for traveling. There'll probably be a lot of people coming and going today. The other one agreed while spinning his halberd. While sparring, he noticed Anastasia desperately rushing towards them. Someone running for their life was generally something a guard didn't want to see so early in the morning, so he notified the other guard and took a better stance to potentially face something that was chasing the girl. Isn't that the necromancer that's staying at Rosie's? The little weird one. The fresher of the guards realized. The other one squinted worriedly. Yeah, she left for a walk a bit ago. Go man the gate controls. We don't want to fight something that made her run like that. The pair of guards took their positions and waited. Nothing seemed to be following the girl as she got closer, but the guard who had remained by the gate was the type to trust his instincts. He stopped Anastasia and demanded an explanation. Out of breath, the necromancer took a moment to speak up. There's another necromancer out there. Close the gate and do not go out, she said and further caught her breath. Also, a pile of corpses by the wall down that way. Having said what she was going to, Anastasia ran off towards the inn, leaving the guards to do their job. Wisely taking heed to her words, they closed the gate and went to check the situation from the top of the wall. As soon as they saw the mess from above, they alerted the other nearby guards and decided to split up, one heading to the barracks for reinforcements and the other to the inn to see if the city's resident necromancer was going to do something. Anastasia stumbled through the inn's door and fell over on her way to the stairs. She banged on Gilbert's door until he opened it. Morning, Anna. I'm going to go ahead and guess that it's another necromancer, the groggy old adventurer said and scratched his messy beard. Yeah. Gear up and come to the kitchen, Anastasia exclaimed while already running back down the hallway. She banged on Amelia's door for a while, but got no response even after several tries. Damn it. I'll just go and get the key. Almost tripping over in the stairs, Anastasia stormed into the kitchen. Rosie was still preparing the breakfast and was surprised by the exhausted necromancer. Kitten, is something wrong? She asked. It's another necromancer. Give me the keys to Amelia's room, I need her prepared to fight. The exhausted girl yelled and hopped in place to keep her momentum. Rosie poured some water for Anastasia and pulled stool from under one of the tables. Take a breather and let me go and get him. She's not in her room anyway. Anastasia had been running for a while now, so a break seemed like a good idea. She moved some of the chopped onions and carrots that were on the table, pressed her forehead against the cool surface, and started to come up with some kind of a plan. Out of the remaining 4 inquisitors, Crimson was the one Anastasia feared the most. Gilbert stepped into the kitchen while still tightening the last straps on his shoulder guards. Rosie and Amelia soon followed him. The priestess hadn't put on her armor as it would take a while to do, and instead just carried it with her, and started strapping it on in the kitchen. Gilbert poured himself some coffee and opened the discussion. So, what are we looking at? Another mean necromancer trying to drag you back to Morn Valley. Anastasia took a deep breath. You wish. It's fucking Crimson. She's the nicest girl you ever meet, until she drowns you in blood because she's just batshit insane. There's no chance she's here to take me in alive, that's just not what she does. She explained and kept gazing out of the kitchen, through the windows to the square. Any idea how we can beat her? I mean, she shouldn't be able to just explode us like you can, right? So do we just bash her head in? Gilbert swung his mace in the air a couple of times while talking. I don't know. The necromancer yelled. How do you plan against someone whose only plan of attack is to be the worst person on earth? The guard who had been at the gate knocked on the wall to announce his presence. No one had noticed him until now, but he had heard the whole story. Might you require help from the guard? This Crimson seems like something we don't want around Valor, and you have the most experience on her, so we'll gladly give you the reins. Anastasia was about to decline the offer because they would probably just be in the way, but realized that there might be a use for them after all. How good are your archers? Chapter 22. Having done what little they could in terms of preparation, Anastasia, Gilbert and Amelia made their stand outside of the firmly sealed gate to the city. Their enemy had no doubt been waiting for her bloody message to be discovered, and though Anastasia had initially slipped back into Valor, they didn't have much time before the guards reported activity outside. The necromancer had quickly slipped into an older, expendable outfit, and hastily headed out with her friends. Crimson wasn't the type that would politely wait for more than a brief moment. Though the guards posted on top of the wall had warned them of what was on the other side of the gate, it wasn't quite enough to prepare the adventurers for the sight. Even if Anastasia had a decent idea of what to expect and Gilbert had seen a lot on his travels, the 7-meter-tall mountain of mulched human bodies caught them off guard. Sitting on a throne of corpses on top of this mound was its creator, Inquisitor Crimson. About as old as the priestess confronting her and mostly in line with the other necromancer in terms of pasty and fragile looks, she would have seemed very unassuming if it weren't for the blood and chunks of flesh dripping off her hands instead of red robes. The Inquisitor waved at Anastasia. "Morning, pumpkin. Long time, no see." She cheerily greeted her. "I hope you don't mind that I brought along some friends I made on the way here. I actually had more, but they started to smell." "Fuck you, Crimson." Anastasia gave her own greeting and tried not to look directly at the mountain of corpses. Crimson gasped theatrically. "Who taught you such language? Are these people being a bad influence to you? Maybe I should befriend them too. After all, my friends are all very polite and well-behaved." She suggested and gestured at the corpses piled under her. Taking her sweet time, the Inquisitor stood up from her throne and started descending from the mound. Joints popped and bones crunched as the corpses under her feet arranged themselves as better footing for their controller. Partially coagulated blood gushed from the torn veins, as the corpses broke themselves by twisting into shapes human bodies weren't meant to reach. "You know, Anastasia, my orders do ask me to bring you back alive, if possible. I honestly don't know if I have the self-control to do that, so could you please resist as little as possible? I want to keep you around for a while, and if I have to tear you apart, it'll make you rot faster," Crimson asked as she reached the ground. She obviously didn't consider her request to be in any way unreasonable. While the insane necromancer was addressing her target, one of the guards on top the wall saw his chance, and swiftly released an arrow at Crimson, just like Anastasia had suggested for the guards to do. The arrow flew true and would have hit its mark, if it weren't for one of the corpses lunging out of the pile, and catching it with its head. 3 more arrows followed suit, but were all similarly intercepted by another corpse shambling out of the mountain. The Inquisitor stared slightly annoyedly at the parapets that were out of her immediate reach, and extended her hand towards the first corpse that had taken a hit for her. The corpse's spine ripped itself out through the skin and arranged itself into a curved shape in the necromancer's hand, while a tendon stretched itself between its tips to form a grotesque bow of questionable efficacy. The other corpse tore out one of the arrows jutting out of it, and handed it over to Crimson, who curtsied and thanked the remains she herself puppeteered. "Don't interrupt me," she yelled and shot the arrow back up at the wall, missing by several meters, but absolutely obliterating the arrow, as it collided with the wall, with far more force than any regular bow would be able to generate. Allowing the bow to collapse in her hand, she tossed it into the pile behind her, and turned back to Anastasia. "Very rude of you to try something like that. I am thoroughly disappointed. Now stand still so I can kill you quickly." Immediately after she finished her sentence, a tendril made out of limbs sprang from the pile behind her and came crashing down right next to Anastasia. It would have ended the fight then and there, if Gilbert hadn't deflected it with his mace. As planned, the guards began firing arrows towards Crimson one by one, forcing the Inquisitor to use some of her concentration to protect herself. Using this chance, Emilia closed in on their enemy. She swung her mace at Crimson, who expected for another corpse to emerge from the pile and take the hit, but it didn't. Someone was interfering with her control. Trying to dodge the priestess's mace far too late, Crimson took a sidestep that resulted in the mace hitting her shoulder, crushing it badly. The necromancer screamed in agony as Emilia prepared for another swing. Suddenly Emilia stopped. Her foot was too close to the pile, and a few of the arms sticking out of it grabbed onto her boot, tripping the priestess and pulling her towards the pile. Crimson's scream had turned into maniacal laughter. Another tendril formed from the pile, wrapping itself around Emilia's leg and lifting the priestess up and moving her towards the arrow fire. Luckily the guards noticed this in time and stopped before hitting her. The crazy necromancer, having regained her full concentration, shook off Anastasia's interference and took back what she considered hers. "You have grown, Anastasia. Flesh is my domain, and yet you stepped in my way so quickly. It's almost a shame to kill you now and never see what you could eventually become. But worry not, I'll keep you and your friends together at least until I get bored of them." She laughed, still in considerable pain, but not letting that distract her. The first tendril, now back in Crimson's full control, swung towards Gilbert and slammed him off his feet. It then continued to attack the old man by wrapping around his feet and dragging him along the ground. Anastasia's plan was in shambles. She was supposed to interfere enough for Amelia to kill their opponent right away, but clearly she hadn't managed that, and now it started to seem like everyone was going to die because of her lack of training. The other possibilities for a plan ran through her mind as she couldn't help but to worry that she had ignored a better method of approach, one that didn't rely on her so much. Time felt slowed as she was forced to stare at the pile of flesh and blood while trying to think of anything she could do. Throwing her daggers or anything else wouldn't work, since Crimson would just use Amelia to protect herself. There must have been something she could do that the Inquisitor couldn't. Suddenly, a line from the tome she had immersed herself in came to her head. A chapter devoted to dealing with other necromancers, one she had mostly skimmed over, had started with the line, "The weakness of those that can control living material lies in their own body." It had seemed pointlessly cryptic at the time, but only then Anastasia realized that it was supposed to be taken literally. While it would have technically possible for her to simply take over the Inquisitor's body through overwhelming power, such an approach would have been far too slow, and Crimson would have noticed it far too early for it to work. What Anastasia needed was a weak point, a chink in the armor that could be focused on and broken through before she would be acted against. Such a weak point could have been anywhere from an open wound to a limb that had gone numb, anywhere the normal function of the body was disrupted. Obviously, a paper cut wouldn't have done much good, but luckily Amelia had managed to land a proper blow on the Inquisitor's shoulder before being caught. The arm dangled lifelessly from the crushed shoulder, its circulation had weakened, and Crimson probably wouldn't have been able to move it even if she wanted to. It provided a relatively easy mark for Anastasia, and she was able to push out the remnants of the Inquisitor's powers just in time as her attack was noticed. It was hard for Anastasia to tell if it took 5 minutes or 5 seconds, but she successfully gained control of the arm. Crimson gasped and ceased laughing as her own arm reached for her throat. "It would have been nice if I could have kept you, wouldn't it?" she asked, and used her powers to sprout several more tendrils from the pile, all of which aimed at Anastasia directly. A fraction of a second before they reached her, the tendrils fell limply onto the dirt road, as Crimson's concentration was broken completely. Glancing up, Anastasia could see 4 arrows embedded in the Inquisitor's chest, killing her almost instantly. With an innocent and sad look on her face, she collapsed and Anastasia could feel her die. As soon as the danger was over, the victorious necromancer could see and feel the bloody carnage left behind, and her vision started to blur out of disgust. She managed to not pass out by quickly turning away and throwing up while falling on her knees. Amelia kicked away the mass of gore that used to be the tendril holding her and hurried over to Crimson's corpse, prepared to end the necromancer if needed, but after inspecting the body, it was clear that she was dead. After signaling this to the guards on top of the wall, she ran to look after Gilbert, who appeared to be fine aside from some minor cuts and bruises that could be healed easily. Both of them knew that the real pain would present itself later this evening or tomorrow morning as constant aches. The guards opened the gate and came to take a closer look at the situation. The one that had been listening in on the original plan helped Anastasia up. "Good work, Miss Necromancer. It looked kind of bad for a second there, but looks like we pulled it off," he said, rightfully proud of the guards' part in the fight. "I hate to bother you more, but we're going to need help cleaning this. It's blocking the gate." Anastasia threw up again. Chapter 23. Dealing with Inquisitor Crimson and what she had left in her wake left the entire party more than a bit scarred. Nothing a few days of rest wouldn't fix, but certainly something that left them exhausted and their minds occupied. So, when the messenger from Vasson finally arrived to bring the necromancer the goods she had been promised in exchange for the book, he found Anastasia blankly staring at her empty cup in the corner table of the inn. Out of the three, she had been hit the hardest by the fight, and almost as badly by the cleanup afterwards, so the package with her name on it was a welcome distraction. Along with the gold, the package contained a small wooden case, and two beautifully folded and wax-sealed letters, one with something a bit heavier stuck inside it, and one that appeared to be a greeting. Anastasia had immediately ignored the letters and pried open the case to see what she had been given. Inside were 3 rings, each with a distinct gemstone attached onto them. Nothing about the case gave any hints on what the rings did, but luckily, she at least had the sense to check the letters before trying them on. Dear Miss Adventurer, this package contains the payment for the book you so graciously sold to me. I shall keep it safe and in good condition till the end of my days, as it is the single most important piece in my collection. I cannot thank you enough. Along with the money we agreed upon, you should find a token, bearing Vassen's coat of arms and a sealed letter. Presenting either of these to any Vassen official, military or otherwise, will guarantee you any aid they are able to give on the spot, and if needed, a messenger will be sent to the capital to inform the king that you have chosen to use the royal blessing. I urge you to hide the letter well and carry the token with you. Your lifestyle will no doubt have you and our people cross paths sooner rather than later. Anastasia already knew of a spot behind her wardrobe where she could hide the letter in, and broke the seal to take the token to keep on her person, as was suggested. In the box, you'll find 3 silver rings. One with an emerald, one with a ruby and one with a topaz embedded into it. I have chosen them from my collection, because I felt like they would benefit someone of your profession the most. The one bearing an emerald will provide its wearer with a clarity of mind. Being able to rationally approach any situation, without the burden of feelings such as fear or hate, can be life-saving. However, you should not wear it for long periods of time, as it will dampen your own feelings, even those of attachment towards your own party. The one with a ruby in it will greatly increase your tolerance to pain and physical harm. It will not protect you from anything, but will keep you operational under extreme pain or loss of blood. I've observed no ill effects from wearing it all the time. If anything, it'll increase your quality of life by making minor aches and pains more tolerable. The last one, with a topaz on it, is my personal favorite. It makes anything that will be said to you next, after putting it on, be true. Others won't notice the effect, and will instead hear whatever the speaker meant to say. Putting it on and asking someone an awkward question can be great fun, but it should also prove helpful when interrogating people while gathering information. Based on my tests, it works once every 5 hours or so use it sparingly. Now, those 3 rings are also a set, created by the same enchantment. Wearing them all at once will provide you with amplified effects. For 1 minute after putting on the last ring, the speed of your thoughts will be greatly increased. Any physical harm done to you will have no effect, and you cannot be lied to. This can be done once every year, and right now they should be fully charged. After the minute is up, the rings will remove themselves from your fingers. Do not try to stop them. One of my assistants is missing his fingers because he kept his hands clenched in a fist. Once again, I cannot thank you enough for the book, and sincerely hope that we will get to meet again. Mikhail Gren. Anastasia looked at the rings again. She was surprised by the absurd enchantments they had. A normal brass ring could provide effects like slightly better recovery from exertion or not having to eat as often, and even then, it would cost a few thousand gold to get an enchantment that lasted for a month. Mikhail made it sound like these would last for years, so their value must have been immense. Rosie brought out some juice and fried snacks Anastasia had ordered earlier. She noticed the letter in the rings. What have you got there? Don't tell me you got this many suitors already. What? No. These were sent by the old fart I sold the book to. They're actually kind of amazing. The necromancer explained and handed over the letter. Rosie was a slow reader. She mouthed the words while reading and every few lines, stopped to stare at a word for a few seconds. Once she was done, she lowered the letter and stared at the rings. You try any of that topaz ring shit on me, and I swear I will have you butcher chickens for a month. The innkeeper understandably warned and headed back into the kitchen. That was exactly what Anastasia had planned to do, but it looked like she'd have to pick another victim. Anastasia put the rings safely in the same pouch she kept the token and her pearl in. While eating the snacks, she continued to read the Necromancer tome. She now knew she couldn't skip the chapters she deemed disgusting. Deeply engrossed by a chapter about better ways to cause interference to other necromancers, she failed to notice the daunting presence of another necromancer first approach the inn, then completely silently enter the building and appear directly behind her. Only when a skeletal hand reached over her shoulder to grab one of her snacks, she awoke to it. You really shouldn't eat while reading. Alizarin will kill you if you ruin the book. Coquelicot noted and ate the piece of fried chicken she had stolen, immediately going back in for seconds. Anastasia released the dagger she had instinctively taken control of, and slapped the bony hand away from her plate. She had no idea how the Inquisitor moved around so unnoticeably, but figured it was something she needed to get used to. That's disgusting. Order your own snacks and don't fiddle mine with those things. She groaned. The Inquisitor sat down next to Anastasia and looked around quickly. Where's the barmaid? Those things are exquisite. Why are you here? I doubt you just happened to come by. Anastasia wasn't too happy about her ally visiting. The red robe reminded her of Crimson. Coquelicot ignored the question but managed to locate Rosie and waved for her to come over. I would like some of these. Could I get THR 5 portions and a bottle of red wine? Something from the south, if you have any. Rosie turned to Anastasia with a look that demanded an explanation, only to receive a shrug in return. Ah, you must be wondering who I am. Standing in front of you is the Grand Inquisitor of Morn Valley, Coquelicot. I have come to congratulate Anastasia on her recent victory over one of our enemies. The Inquisitor said with a twirl of one of her hands. The innkeeper measured her new guest with her gaze. So you're the one who gave her that book. Don't cause any problems and I'll let you stay. She muttered and left to cook the order after glancing at Anastasia once more. Wonderful, back to business. I've heard about Crimson. You've done well again. That nutjob was no small-time necromancer. I would have loved to help you, but going close to any of the Inquisitors with my hands is not a smart move. Those daggers of yours probably won't help much either. Coquelicot congratulated her ally with a pat on the back. Anastasia scoffed at the gesture. She was exactly what's wrong with necromancers in Morn Valley. All of you are disgusting, and I see no difference between you and her. It's such a shame you think like that, but I hope I can improve your image of us once we've cleared out the ones that support the old ways. We plan on opening Morn Valley to the world. Imagine how much necromancers could do if they weren't bound to an insane old cult. The Inquisitor exclaimed, making promises Anastasia had some serious doubts about. Coquelicot noticed her order being carried and got excited. She had been living with mostly the same diet of roots and nuts as Anastasia had, with the addition of some of the treats available only to the few selected higher-ups within the country, but even those would be considered basic meals everywhere else. Seeing someone eat with 6 hands was quite a sight, and it caught the attention of some of the more curious adventurers in the tavern. Having emptied the platter in no time, the Grand Inquisitor Coquelicot wiped the corners of her mouth and poured herself another glass of wine. We need these things in Morn Valley. They have no idea what they're missing. She commented on the food. Anastasia was impressed and slightly disgusted by the amount of fried chicken, potatoes and onions that had disappeared from the platter, but it did make the Inquisitor seem more human than before. At least it seemed like she wasn't cruelty-driven enough to not enjoy fried and unhealthy food, so maybe there was hope for her home country after all. However, it was hard to imagine Morn Valley without the cult. So that's it. You came here just to give me a pat on the back and eat. I don't need encouragement from you, and aren't you supposed to be busy? Anastasia asked, hoping her unexpected guest would leave already. The Inquisitor neatly folded her napkin back into her pocket. Don't be like that. Of course I have something for you. I just had to make sure Crimson wasn't around before I could come. She placed a leather mail and a pair of steel gauntlets on the table. Though they seemed like decent pieces of armor, their designs were a bit too Mernvallyish for Anastasia's liking, as both the mail and gauntlets had a skull pattern on them, and had their leather parts dyed black. You got me some armor. You know I have tons of money now, right? The adventurer turned her nose up. Coquelicot scoffed at the lukewarm response. Why could you at least pretend like you were grateful? These aren't just some basic gear. Alizarin spent ages making them and then adjusting them to fit on your flimsy husk. They have bone plates embedded into them, and you can harden them to be uncrushable with necromancy. You can't use them against other necromancers, but we don't really want you dying on one of those stupid quests you take now either. Seeing some utility to the gear now, Anastasia gingerly inspected them. Thanks, I guess. Tell Alizarin that I'll take good care of them, and that his book is totally fine. Coquelicot stood up, took a few coins from her pocket and placed them on the table. Thank the cook for me. We'll see each other again sooner or later. Anastasia realized that this was her chance and searched for the topaz ring from her pouch. While slipping it on behind her back, she grinned. Say, Coquelicot, there's something I've been wondering. How do you wash yourself in a bath without hands? I can't imagine you getting the bone ones wet. I pay courtesans to do it for me, of course, the Inquisitor said nonchalantly. Anastasia chuckled. What? I said piss off. It's none of your business. Coquelicot repeated what she thought she had said before. Anastasia thanked Mikhail in her head. The topaz one was clearly the best out of the three. Chapter 24. I have way too much money. Anastasia muttered and emptied her purse on top of a moderately sized pile of gold she had collected on her bed. Between the quest reward, the money from the bits and bobs she had sold, and the price she received for the book, she now possessed far more money than she knew what to do with. Even in Valor, her savings were starting to be considerable, but in the world outside, it was enough for a house and a fair bit of land around it. It seemed wasteful to just throw around such amounts without a proper plan, but at the same time, she hadn't really had money before, and it was definitely burning in her pockets. She did some simple calculations regarding the cost of her room and board, which she still had to pay for, despite the one responsible for providing them had taken a liking to her, and set aside a fair portion of her money to ensure she could keep paying for them. After hiding the separated portion behind her wardrobe, along with the royal blessing, she still had a pile of coins that seemed hardly smaller than before. The next step was to go through a list of things she needed. Thanks to Coquelicot, she had her armor situation sorted for the time being, and the dagger she had would still do for a while. However, her wardrobe was definitely in the need for more variety. The few dresses she had picked up so far were alright to wear in the city, but for quests, something that wouldn't get caught or grabbed so easily would be better. She had already been grabbed by the Kelpie once, and since she wasn't big or strong like the rest of her party, so it was fair to assume she'd get tossed around more than once in her career. After testing the hardening ability of her new armor, they did make her feel safer, but would only go so far. But getting some clothes would barely even dent her finances. She had thought about getting some enchanted jewelry, but because of the timed nature of common enchantments, those would be a part of the prep work for a new quest, and not something to buy just because. In the end, she decided to head downstairs for some suggestions. The usual evening crowd had already gathered into the tavern and were merrily drinking away their own quest rewards. Sommelier was bothering Amelia about something, and it didn't take long for Rosie to come and drag the Spriggan outside. Gilbert and Dammer were sitting in a corner table, smoking their pipes, drinking and being old in almost complete silence. Maximilian was talking to some elven ladies near the counter, which was kind of surprising to see for some reason. Anastasia didn't feel like bothering any of them and instead sat on the closest empty chair. Oh, Miss Necromancer. Good to see you're doing well. A man she didn't recognize greeted Anastasia. Her confusion must have been evident as the man could see it. I see you don't recognize me without the guard armor, and I suppose it has been a while. I'm Otto. I greeted you when you first arrived to Valor with Gilbert, and took care of the little situation with the paladin. Oh, you're that guy. Thanks for keeping me out of jail then. Can I buy you around? The necromancer suggested and placed a neat stack of coins on the table. Otto scratched his chin and smiled. We don't take bribes, but if it's a gift from a friend. Anastasia picked up on the hint and asked Rosie to bring out a drink for her new friend, who just happened to celebrate his almost birthday. By the way, Otto, is that asshole of a paladin still locked up? She asked, figuring she might as well get to know the guard who saved her. Nay. Some church officials came by and asked for him to be released. The guild couldn't be bothered to deal with him and let him go. Of course, he's not allowed to come into the city anymore. The off-duty guard sighed. Personally, I think a bit more thinking time would have done the lad well. Knowing that Alex had been released was slightly disappointing to Anastasia. She'd have to tell that to Amelia too. The two kept chatting about what had happened after Anastasia had arrived to Valor. Otto had heard about the fights against the Inquisitors, as the guards that had helped with Crimson apparently wouldn't shut up about how they killed a necromancer. Eventually the topic reached Anastasia's current problem of having too much money. Do you have any ideas what I could do with it? I already have almost everything I need. The necromancer asked and tossed her heavy purse onto the table. You could try visiting another city to see what their market has to offer. Valor is a huge city with plenty of shops, but almost all of them sell stuff only adventurers really need. A city like Crescent, that doesn't have adventurers in it, might have a ton of interesting stuff to see and buy. But Crescent in particular, as Otto suggested, but was cut off by Anastasia before being able to finish his line. You're a genius. I was getting tired of just sitting around here anyway. I have to tell the others, she exclaimed. Otto raised his hand to stop the girl but was too late, she had already stormed off. He figured that Anastasia would probably be fine no matter what, and it was starting to be late. Being a man with a family, he thanked the innkeeper and headed home for the night. Anastasia almost knocked over Amelia's glass in excitement as she sat down next to the priestess. Guys, we're going to Crescent, she yelled. Amelia, who had found her way back in, looked disappointed. Crescent. I can't help you with that. We had a quest near there and things went a bit sour. You have no idea how banned we are from that city. There was a mob with torches and pitchforks and everything. Amelia almost spat out her drink. That was you guys. I was a priestess in the church there when that happened. Anyway, why Crescent? These days it's a bit unwelcoming. I want to go shopping. Anastasia explained herself. Who's coming with me? Well, you do need someone to look after you and I know the place, so count me in. Amelia agreed. I do also see what happened to that place since I left. Doubt it's anything good, but who knows. Rosie had overheard their conversation while serving some of the tables near them and came over. Did you say Crescent? I'll come with you. I need to buy some stuff for the inn, and they don't really sell them here. I'm used to the mean looks, and if I have a couple of humans with me, it should be fine. Yay, hear that, Amelia. Rosie's coming too. Oh, but don't you have to run the inn? The necromancer realized. Rosie cleared her throat and turned to face the rest of the tavern. All right, you lot. I have to go to Crescent to buy some shit for the inn. Most of it is because you idiots keep breaking them, so as a punishment, I leave the inn in Gilbert's less than competent hands. So have fun with that. She then turned back to Anastasia. No, I don't. The innkeeper's declaration caused a slight decrease in everyone's mood, since they knew they would have to manage with a much more limited menu for a few days, but that would be fixed in no time with more alcohol. This was something that happened every year or so, as the adventurers, who weren't exactly delicate in their actions, broke tableware and ruined sheets and such fairly regularly. Even Gilbert had accepted his fate by now. He would just have to make some decent coffee in the morning, and everything would be fine. Holly would take care of the night shift as usual, but she would no doubt be confused at first. The trio would depart early in the morning, as the walk over to Crescent would take about half a day, so leaving early would leave them with enough time to look for lodging. Anastasia went to bed earlier than usual that night, thinking that no doubt, the trip was going to be amazing. Chapter 25. The road outside Valor's northern gates was still stained with blood in the spot Crimson had placed her mountain of corpses in, and it would take a good while before rain and wear from the feet of the passing travelers would clear it, at least on the surface. Naturally, Anastasia would be able to sense the blood stuck deeper in the soil until it decayed in the coming months. On her way out, the necromancer didn't even entertain the idea of walking over it, and instead took a detour around the stain. A mere passing glance at it gave her a chill and made her gag. Rosie and Amelia weren't as bothered by it, and hardly even noticed it while conversing happily. For the first time in weeks, the sky was overcast and there was a chance for rain, but it was impossible to predict it. That didn't bother any of the three though. Aside from the roads becoming muddy and slippery, a little rain wasn't a problem. Rosie had heard about Anastasia's refusal to walk on their last quest. Don't think whining will get you a free ride this time. I'm not all soft like Gilbert, and will not carry you, she warned the necromancer. I wasn't going to ask you to do that. Anastasia protested such prejudice. Yes, You were. Emilia pointed out, likely truthfully. After about an hour of walking, Anastasia was ready to start whining, but kept silent because she wasn't quite sure if Rosie would actually leave her behind or not. They came to a crossroads. On one of the paths the road entered a forest, and on the other, it continued along the tree line. Rosie stopped to look at her map. Both of them take us to Crescent eventually, but the one that goes through the forest is shorter. I usually go there by hitching a ride from a merchant, and they refuse to use the shortcut. Guess they're uneasy about going into a forest. She explained and showed the map to Emilia. We're not merchants, so we'll use the shorter road. Let's go already. Anastasia decided for the group and continued directly ahead. At this point, she would have taken a shortcut through 15 cursed graveyards and a bandit camp, if it meant that the walking would end sooner. Rosie shrugged and followed the necromancer. The forest itself wasn't that large or dense, so they should have been able to handle whatever lived in it. She didn't have a fraction of Gilbert's knowledge about the area, but a small forest equals small animals sounded like it made sense. Well, in the forest, Emilia and Rosie chatted about something, but Anastasia couldn't make out any of the words. Everything had become just noise to her, and all she could concentrate on was how much her feet hurt. She was constantly falling behind the two, and had to run for a few steps every now and then to not get left behind. Guys, can we take a break? She pleaded. Rosie frowned and tried to figure out how far along the forest trail they were. Honestly, I'd rather not stop in here, even if it should be safe. She hesitated. Look at the poor thing, she's clearly having trouble. Should we slow down the pace a bit? Emilia said and grasped the innkeeper's hand. I'm already basically crawling. Rosie sighed. Tiger folk, like many other types of beast folk, were made for traveling at an insanely fast pace for a day or two, but would start quickly losing stamina after that. Rosie had to keep paying attention to keep pace with the other two, and the easiest way to do this was to keep talking with Emilia. She could have tried to slow down more by talking with Anastasia, but that likely would have gotten tiresome almost immediately, as all she would do is complain. Anastasia lay down on a patch of grass next to the road, and took her boots off. Maybe I should buy a wagon. I mean, I don't have anywhere to keep a horse, but maybe Gilbert could pull it. Also, Emilia, how can you keep walking with that armor on all the time? She asked to notify the other two that she had just given up on walking. It's my uniform. At first it was really uncomfortable, especially in really hot or cold places. But by now it's like a second skin for me, and being without it just doesn't feel right. The devotee explained and hit her chest plate a couple of times. Rosie let out a slight growl and grinned. I've seen you be just fine without it. Emilia threw one of her gauntlets at the innkeeper. Damn it, Rosie. Not in front of her. They sat down next to Anastasia to take a break, because the necromancer obviously wasn't going to move. The sky was still cloudy but looked slightly better than earlier, easing their slight worries about rain. The tree swayed slightly in the breeze, and the sound made Anastasia sleepy. Just as she was about to close her eyes, she felt something move towards them in the forest. 3 somethings to be exact. Whatever they were, they headed straight towards Anastasia and her friends. She had listened to Gilbert enough to know that animals wouldn't act like that. Something's coming. Get ready. She notified the other two, who had been very preoccupied by each other, and pointed in the direction they were being approached from. Realizing that they had been noticed, 3 men came out of the forest across the road. They were wearing dark clothing and non-matching pieces of armor. Anastasia hadn't actually seen bandits before, but if she had to guess, this is what bandits look like. We're sorry to interrupt you ladies, but would you kindly give up any money or valuables you might have? The largest of the 3 men said politely. All 3 had their faces covered, but it was easy to tell he was the leader. Anastasia didn't exactly feel threatened. If anything, she felt bad for the men. She turned to Rosie. Are we being robbed? She asked without paying any mind to the veiled threat. I'm not sure, kitten. They might be just beggars. Robbers would be more intimidating. The innkeeper pondered mockingly. The would-be robbers weren't happy to be taken so lightly, and pulled out their swords. Ladies, we're being extremely polite here. Let's not turn this into anything more disgusting. Hand over any money and jewelry you might have, and we'll let you go with your lives and dignities intact. The leader of the bunch snarled. Emilia decided to join in on the mockery. Oh, I am but a humble servant of Sylvia. You wouldn't lay your hand on a priestess, would you? May I offer you a prayer instead? Oh, Lady Sylvia, hear the call of your chosen one, and protect the faces of these idiots, as we smite them to the ground, lest they lose any teeth. The bandits had had enough and charged in. Unfortunately for them, Anastasia had been concentrating on their hands and proceeded to fracture a few of the bones in them. She had been slightly worried that their hands would explode like the fish before, but some of the advice in Elizarand's book had sunk in, and the bandits got to keep their fingers. Instead, they just dropped their weapons from their weirdly bent hands, and couldn't quite stop before being within Rosie's reach. The tigress grabbed two of them by the throat, and slammed the poor outlaws to the ground. The third, and likely the unluckiest one, got hit in the groin with Amelia's mace, and dropped next to his friends. Anastasia put her boots back on. Does this mean the break is over? After leaving the unlucky outlaws laying by the road, they got out of the forest without further troubles, and arrived to what could be considered Crescent's outskirts. Like any normal city, Crescent had fields full of crops for kilometers around it. Well before the city itself was visible, Emilia was reminded about her life there by the side. She would often visit the farms, spreading the blessings of Sylvia to the people and even the soil itself. It was hard to believe it had already been over a year since she and Alex had left the city to run the temple's errands elsewhere. As they got closer to the city, something felt more and more off. The people working on the fields didn't greet them, instead they just looked away and started to work faster. Guess they don't remember me anymore. Visiting these farms used to be one of my favorite things about being a priestess. Emilia lamented. She decided to go talk to one of the farmhands to see if she could get some info on the current state of the city. Excuse me, mister. I was wondering if you could answer a few questions. The farm worker seemed stressed. I'm sorry, Your Holiness. I'm trying my best to gather the goods to pay for my next indulgence. He uttered in a frightened tone, as if he could be hit at any time. The what? The devotee asked, not remembering there being any kind of tithes available. The temple would merely heavily suggest that donations were perhaps less than voluntary. I'm really sorry, but I just don't have the time. Could you please leave us be? I promise we'll be at the next service. The farmhand whimpered and tried to continue his work. Emilia had no idea what the man was talking about, but bothering him clearly wasn't a good idea. She returned to her companions, who were waiting on the road, and told them what had happened. Crescent had always been ruled by the church to a degree, but this is not how things were when she had left. Chapter 26. The gates of Crescent were firmly shut, and in front of them stood two paladins, posted there to stop and search all who entered the city, and probably to catch any undesirables. Visibly unpleased by the current state of the city, Rosie snarled as she peered at the gates. Well, that's a fucking problem right there. Can I even get in anymore? My outfit should be enough to fool them. I still look like I outrank a run-of-the-mill paladin, so they probably won't dare ask too many questions. So please, just play along. Emilia pointed out and straightened her armor. I'm so sorry if I say something horrible. As they approached the gates, the paladins noticed them, and one of them came forward to greet the priestess. Wearing an armor similar in design to the one Alex had worn, though much more basic and lacking in decoration, he clearly belonged to the bottom rank of the same order of church paladins. Halt, priestess. Why have you brought this disgusting creature to our holy city? He asked and saluted Emilia. Mind your rank, soldier. Emilia scolded the paladin. My business is mine and mine alone. But if you must know, I have been using it as a physical aid. After all, it's the only thing they're fit to do. And what about the child? The paladin continued his query. Emilia frowned. Nosy, aren't you? Do they not teach you how a paladin is supposed to conduct themselves in the presence of a priestess? She's here to learn the ways of the church under my supervision. She'll probably end up outranking you by the time we leave. Emilia lied and placed her hand on Anastasia's head. Can we enter now? I have some urgent business inside. The paladin waved his hand for the other one, who began to open the gates. As you probably know, we prefer to have the beasts leashed or cuffed, so please put these on it. Like with any animal, even the obedient ones can lash out, and yours is far from small. The paladin laughed and handed Emilia a pair of handcuffs. The priestess carefully fastened the cuffs around Rosie's wrists and almost broke into tears. During the entire conversation, Emilia had to use every last bit of her self-discipline to not start bashing the paladin's head in with her mace. After reluctantly allowing the paladin to check the cuffs, they were allowed in without further inspection of their backpacks, further displaying Emilia's surprisingly high position within the church. After making sure they were within the paladin's earshot, Anastasia couldn't hold it in anymore. "What the fuck is wrong with this place? Just say the word and I'll wipe this shithole off the map," she said and lifted her arms up. "Don't do that. I'm sure there are still plenty of good people living here. It's just the church that has gone to shit in the last couple of years. Let's just head to an inn I know." Emilia sighed and pulled up her hood, partly to avoid attention, and partly because she was tearing up after her act. The city was still as busy as Emilia remembered, but something had changed for the worse. Back when she still lived in Crescent, there were maybe 3 or 4 paladins stationed at the church, but now there were dozens of them patrolling the streets. While the beast folk weren't all too common even back then, they were still treated as normal citizens, aside from not being allowed in the church, which was something Emilia couldn't believe she let slide back then. Being surrounded by enough people that accepted something horrible as a part of normal life can make anyone blind to even worse things, though that was only an excuse she made up to give herself a pass. They navigated narrow alleys, avoiding any bigger streets whenever they could. Even though Emilia hadn't been in the city for a while, and most of the paladins had only been brought in after she left, there was a big risk of running into someone who knew her and would blow their cover. Keeping their hoods on and heads low, they eventually reached the inn unnoticed. "The owner is my friend. He'll let us stay in a room with a bit of privacy," Emilia whispered and headed inside. Immediately after opening the door, Emilia began to doubt her plan. The whole room was packed with fully armored paladins, chomping down on their meals. The sudden appearance of a priestess caused a small commotion, which only grew louder once Emilia's companion stepped in. "You not start a fight," the priestess whispered to both of them separately, since she wasn't entirely sure which one was more eager to teach the paladins some manners. As they headed to the counter, someone in the crowd threw a bottle at Rosie, clearly aiming for her head, but missing and hitting her shoulder instead. The bottle bounced off harmlessly, but both the tigress and Anastasia were one mean comment away from slaughtering everyone in the room. Even though she was cuffed, Rosie could easily take care of the paladins immediately around them, while Anastasia could focus on the rest. Behind the counter stood a short, stout man, roughly as old as Gilbert and extremely harmless looking. His face had immediately lit up in hope when he had recognized the priestess as his friend. "What can I do for you, Your Holiness?" he carefully asked, trying to not look suspicious to the paladins. Emilia placed her mace on the counter. "I would like to rent a room for me and my apprentice. The beast needs to be watched at all times, so I would like to have it stay in the room as well," she said with a stern tone, but winked at the innkeeper at the end. The man could hardly contain his joy. "Emilia, didn't you?" he said, but was silenced by the priestess pressing a finger on his lips. "I said I would like to rent a room," Emilia insisted and slightly nodded towards Rosie. The innkeeper finally caught on and wiped the smile from his face. "Oh, of course. I'm so sorry. Though I can't ask someone as divine as you to pay for one of my humble rooms. Please, follow me." He calmed down and led them through a narrow corridor into a staircase leading to the basement. The room they arrived in was some kind of storage, with assorted furniture and spare bedding piled everywhere. But behind a couple of cupboards and chairs were 2 beds and table, clearly put there to house someone who didn't want to be seen. The innkeeper put his lantern on the table and started dusting the beds. "I assume you want to stay out of sight. Last time I saw you, you weren't exactly in good terms with the church. That hasn't changed, has it?" he asked with a hushed voice. Emilia smiled. "I only serve Lady Sylvia. The church has nothing to do with her anymore. That much is clear to me. Good to see you're still sane, Ed," she whispered and hugged the innkeeper. Once freed from the priestess's grasp, the old man turned to Rosie. "I assume Miss Tigress here is restrained only for the looks. I don't remember you supporting the teachings about humanity's superiority over beast folk," he said and inspected the handcuffs. Nice to meet you. My name is Edgar. I've let this girl sleep her hangover away in here, ever since she started drinking. Rosie sniffed the top of Edgar's head. Look at that, the first decent person in this shit heap of a city. Call me Rosie, she whispered. You know, Rosie owns an inn too. She's an amazing cook, Amelia explained excitedly while unlocking the cuffs. While the others got to know each other, Anastasia remembered that her feet were at the point of giving out. Her anger towards the paladins had just numbed her to it temporarily. After shedding off whatever she was carrying, she collapsed into one of the beds and started massaging her shins. Noticing her, the innkeeper turned his attention to the necromancer. Oh, what about the young lass? An apprentice, you said? He asked. That would be Anna. We work together as adventurers. She's a bit whiny but tries her best most of the time. Also, she's probably the most powerful necromancer in the world, but don't worry about that, Amelia explained. Edgar nodded. If you say so. I hear some nasty things about the necromancers, but if she's your friend, she can't be all bad. He reasoned. What brings you back here? Last time I saw you, you were drunk out of your mind and couldn't get out fast enough. We just came here to shop a bit, but honestly this place is beyond fucked, so I don't think that's happening. We should probably just leave. Amelia sighed and sat down on the other bed. The market is still fine. After I get you a normal cloak, you and the lass can still go there no problem. I fear Rosie will have to stay here though, the innkeeper suggested. Amelia looked at Rosie to see how she felt about waiting inside for a day. Don't worry about it, kitten, and you can go check out what the market has to offer. If you get the chance, I could give you a list of the stuff I came to buy for the inn, and maybe you could get them for me. I was going to rent a carriage to get them back to Valor too, so we could just slip out in it too, she said and sat down next to Amelia. Edgar looked like he was deep in thought. If it's goods for an inn you're looking for, I know the right place. No one would bat an eye if I went to get them, he offered kindly. It was decided that Anastasia and Amelia were going to check the market in the morning, while Edgar would rent the wagon and get the goods for Rosie to be delivered. That night both Anastasia and Amelia had a hard time falling asleep. Anastasia wondered if it would be justified to kill off all the church paladins, since it would free the people of Crescent from having to pay for indulgences, and because no one there knew what she was, so it would be a piece of cake. But would that make her just as bad as the necromancers of Morn Valley? Killing off anyone that didn't agree with her seemed like something they would do and not what she was aiming for. She was also worried that the stench of dead things had gotten stuck on her, because no one wanted to share a bed with her, despite her being the smallest of the three. It must have been very uncomfortable for both Rosie and Amelia to have to sleep together in a small bed, barely large enough for one. Meanwhile in the other bed, Amelia was being bothered by her own troubles. By asking Edgar, the priestess had gotten the full picture of what happened to Crescent after she had left. The church had suddenly increased its influence and eventually completely dethroned the duke, who had previously governed over it. Now they were demanding tributes from the people in exchange for indulgences at an increasing rate. It was disheartening for Amelia to see what was once her hometown be reduced to that state. Concerned for the people she had once helped, she sought strength from her goddess, and got an answer part of her had hoped for. The tale of this sorry excuse of a church must come to an end, and who would be more fitting to bring it down than a loyal priestess? The people still believe, and I am not without power here. Rest now, my child, for tomorrow we'll sing for the end of these times of falsehood and mockery. Hearing that, Amelia knew that silently leaving was no longer an option. Anna, are you still awake? She whispered. Yeah, the necromancer answered. We might have to start a fight after all, the priestess sighed. While the two plotted, Rosie was perfectly happy sharing the small bed with Amelia, and had fallen asleep without any difficulties. Chapter 27. Like most churches, the Temple of Sylvia was in the central square of the city, and the rest of the buildings almost seemed like they had been built around it, despite the temple being considerably newer than most of the city. The cause of this was the church slowly acquiring the land around the temple and rebuilding the houses on it to fit the temple's looks. The newer buildings were also now used to house the proud paladins and other officials of the Church of Sylvia, and the previous residents had been evicted as soon as possible. Even the locals avoided going through the square whenever it was possible, as the area was under the strict watch of at least 20 paladins, and anyone suspicious or even unfamiliar looking would have gotten harassed by them and forced to donate for wasting the paladins' time. It was a miracle Anastasia made it to the temple without being stopped, but while walking up the grand stairs that led to the temple's door, she could feel all of their gazes on her back. And surely, 5 paladins had followed her and were now waiting at the bottom of the stairs, clearly trying to look intimidating with their hands readied on their weapons. Nailed onto the temple's heavy wooden door was a short note. "Only come in if you are here to receive indulgences. The priests are busy serving our goddess Sylvia, so bothering them without a good reason could be a sin on its own." Wow, they're barely even hiding it anymore. Anastasia scoffed and dug out her purse before dragging open the door. "Hey. Anyone here? I want to buy indulgences. Like a ton of them. You couldn't believe some of the stuff I've done." She yelled and jingled the coins in her purse. The inside of the temple was surprisingly simple. Anastasia had expected golden candlesticks and precious works of art, but all she could see was a few pews and an altar that had a single book on it. The floors were dirty, and the paint on the walls was peeling off. Clearly none of the money was spent on the temple's upkeep. A door near the altar opened, and from it came an overweight old priest, wearing an outfit similar to Amelia's, but with a lot more golden jewelry and wine stains. As he wobbled towards the necromancer, he was still trying to tie his belt after clearly being interrupted from something. "Are you the guy I can buy the indulgences or whatever from? I've got something I need to get off my chest," Anastasia asked. Obviously displeased by the disturbance, the old man frowned. "Mind your manners, girl. In front of you is the high priest of this temple. Show some respect. Now, do you actually have any gold? Sylvia is not interested in your pocket money." Anastasia threw her purse on the floor. What was most of her reward from the previous quest thumped on the hard wooden floor and spread on it, all to weight of the priest's feet. One of the coins rolled away from them and gave some noise to what would have been a long and awkward silence, as the priest tried to gauge the amount of money Anastasia was supposedly giving him. Trying his best to hide the glint in his eyes after seeing the excessive amount of money, the old priest collected himself and straightened his uniform slightly. "I must say, your manners only keep getting worse and worse, but Our Lady is a gracious one, and is willing to accept your gold to pay for any sins you may have done. I do have to wonder what burdens your conscience enough for you to be willing to pay this much," he asked while clearly doing his best to hold back and not grab the money. Anastasia shrugged. "Well, I haven't really done anything yet, but I'm probably going to kill a bunch of you asshats before the day is over." She grinned and waved her hat swiftly. The priest's old leg bones snapped like twigs as he collapsed onto the floor and screamed horribly. "Paladins, come quiet." It didn't take long for paladins to start pouring in from both the door near the altar and the main door Anastasia came in from. In seconds there were 15 supposedly holy warriors surrounding her with their weapons drawn. The priest crawled away from the necromancer and wept in agony. "Kill this wench. She used some unholy magic to injure me." Among the paladins were a few higher-ranking members of their order, donning eerily familiar set of fancy-looking armor, exactly like the one Amelia's previous companion had worn, when Anastasia pinned him down with chicken bones. They commanded the other paladins to carefully close in on Anastasia while staying behind their men. "I don't suppose anyone here wants to just tell me where the reliquary is, before anyone else gets hurt?" "No. It would save everyone a lot of trouble," the necromancer suggested, but was almost glad that no one accepted her offer when the first paladin lunged towards her. She had improved her skills greatly, but with too many targets approaching her so quickly, she couldn't quite control her powers accurately enough, leading to a disturbingly high number of limbs exploding off instead of being neatly broken. Some of the paladins probably wouldn't survive their wounds, but Anastasia had made peace with it, for now at least. Just like Auburn and Crimson, they didn't have a single redeeming quality and needed to go. With the paladins dealt with for the moment, Anastasia hopped over to the priest, who was still trying to crawl away from her. "So, the reliquary?" she asked, trying to not look at the mangled paladins. "Foolish child, you can't do this. There are over 400 paladins in this city. No matter what kind of an unholy witch you are, there's no way you can beat all of them. And the citizens will help us too. They might be idiots, but they are devoted idiots. The priest threatened and clutched his golden necklace, almost like he thought Anastasia was there to rob them. Anastasia scoffed. Really? Not a single threat about a divine punishment by Sylvia. It's almost like this whole church is full of shit. She shrugged and stepped on one of the priest's broken legs. He wailed in pain and tried desperately to crawl away. As she's just some washed-up old goddess, and probably doesn't even exist. The old man wailed in agony. Guess we'll find out today. Now, for the last time, the reliquary. Anastasia asked once more and put more of her weight on the priest's leg. With an extremely shaky hand, the high priest pointed towards the altar. Anastasia quickly ran to and slid over the altar. She was in a bit of a hurry, as more paladins would probably start flooding in when the reinforcements arrived. Though according to Emilia, they didn't bother much with bows and arrows, making them extremely ill-equipped for fighting necromancers. Though apparently she shouldn't entirely rule out the possibility that someone among the paladins or even a priest would know some offensive magic, which would cause a whole heap of trouble. Behind the altar, there was a small locked cabinet. Anastasia wiggled the tip of her dagger between the doors and started to lever them open. It didn't take much for the wooden doors to give in and pop open, revealing 4 expensive-looking boxes, all of them decorated with gold, silver and gemstones, and sealed with wax. What Anastasia mumbled under her breath. Emilia had only mentioned a single box and didn't go into details what the relic she was supposed to take was. She would only be able to fit one of the boxes in her backpack and needed her hands free for fighting. Still in a hurry, she cut open the seals and emptied the boxes on the altar. Okay, so we have a medallion, a tiara, some kind of spiky crystal thing and a napkin. Might as well take them all, I suppose. She reasoned and put the medallion on her neck, the tiara on her head and the small charred piece of cloth into her pocket. The 4th relic was a spiky ball of pointy crystals, roughly 10 centimeters in diameter and extremely fragile looking. Anastasia picked it up and was immediately stung by one of the crystals, which sunk into her finger like it was nothing. Surprised and worried about the blood she would see, the necromancer dropped the relic, causing it to hit the floor and shatter. Shit, please don't be the important one. Anastasia cursed and quickly swept the pieces under the cabinet to hide her mistake. 3 out of 4 is still good. She mumbled and wrapped her finger with her own napkin. As she hurried past the injured and dying paladins, she kept her eyes on the floor and stopped to pick up the gold she had dropped earlier. The wails of the priest were louder than anyone else's and caught her attention once more. Oh yeah. Hey, old priest guy, don't run off anywhere. I think Emilia might want to have a word with you later. She mocked the old man. A look of surprise washed over the high priest's face. Emilia. You work with that delusional trollop. We thought she had drank herself to death in some ditch. Well, she certainly tried, if that helps. Anastasia shrugged. I hope my paladins won't kill you too quickly, so we can have a proper public execution to remind the people what happens when you try to oppose the church. The high priest shouted and coughed. Anastasia wasn't too worried by the threats and shoved her purse back into her backpack before leaving. Instead of tackling open the door straight away, she concentrated on her surroundings and found out that there were at least 50 more paladins in the square, just waiting for her. Carefully looking around and weighing her options, Anastasia came up with a crude plan and walked over to one of the higher-ranking paladins she had defeated. The unlucky man had already succumbed to the loss of blood after having his legs exploded inside his greaves. Shock and awe as then. If you were anyone else, I'd feel really bad about what I've done and am about to do. She sighed. Emilia was sitting on a bench by the edge of the city square, anxiously waiting for her friend to step out from the church. Seeing the paladins rush in made her even more worried than before, when she had offered to go in with Anastasia, but was turned down by her. If it weren't for the voice in her head telling her that Anastasia was fine and already had the relic, Emilia would have rushed in her aid when more paladins started to gather in front of the temple stairs. With each passing second, she started to doubt her decision to allow Anastasia to go in alone more and more, finding it increasingly hard to believe the voice in her head. Her self-doubt was stopped from spiraling out of control by a corpse of the paladin crashing through the stained glass window above the temple's door. It landed on the stairs and rolled down, leaving behind a trail of blood and silencing the entire horde of paladins that had gathered in front of the temple. Advertisement. Chapter 28. Anastasia sat at the top of the stairs, waiting for the stunned paladins to make a move. At first a couple of the braver members of the church tried rushing up the stairs, but, for a reason, they didn't understand, they were thrown back to the bottom. "She's a demon," one of the fallen paladins accused as he was helped up by the others. "How can we fight against a demon without a priest to protect us from her unholy magics?" Being called a demon didn't make Anastasia happy. She had tried her best to hold back and kill as few as possible in the temple, but she still had a lot to learn. It surprised her how little the murders bothered her. Sure, they were the lowest of the low, but still, shouldn't she feel at least a little bad about it? Maybe she was way closer to a necromancer that would just slaughter everyone on the square without a second thought than she admitted. After a long enough wait, she could see a familiar white hood move towards her amongst the crowd. The appearance of a priestess boosted the morale of the so-called holy warriors, and one of the paladins shouted hubristically, "You're done now, demon. A priestess has arrived." Emilia shoved him aside and started climbing the stairs. "Stay back, my brothers. I shall take care of this." The paladins cheered as the priestess got closer and closer to Anastasia without being thrown back. But slowly the encouraging shouts died down when they realized that neither of the women on the stairs acted hostile toward each other. "Anna, could you give me the medallion?" Emilia asked, confirming the doubts that had started to present themselves among the paladins. "Oh, it's this one. Can I keep the tiara? I kinda like it," Anastasia said and handed over the relic. She briefly protested when Emilia snatched away the crown as well. "I didn't know they had relics from other temples here. Was there anything else?" Emilia asked. She investigated the two she had and was relieved to see that they were indeed the authentic relics. Anastasia briefly pondered whether she should tell her about the broken one. Yeah, just this napkin. Totally didn't have anything else. I checked twice." She lied and handed over the napkin. The priestess was overjoyed about the additional relics and marveled at them, almost forgetting where she was. All that was cut short by a shout from the crowd. "That wench is no priestess," an unfortunately familiar voice revealed. The voice of Emilia's previous partner had burned into Anastasia's mind during the episode in Valor. "She's just a delusional drunkard that was thrown out of the church." Alex stood in front of the other paladins, wearing a new set of armor with even more decorations and jewelry. He had clearly gotten a promotion after getting released from the guild's prison. "And the other bitch is just one of those disgusting necromancers from Morn Valley. Luckily, I have something just for the likes of her," he continued and took aim with a crossbow he had in his hand. As the bolt was released, Emilia tried to protect her friend, but was just a fraction of a second too late. The bolt hit Anastasia in the throat and pierced it, grazing her spine. She began choking on her own blood and fell on her back. It took a second for Emilia to realize what had happened, and when she finally did, there was nothing she could do. "No. Anna." The priestess yelled and fell on her knees next to Anastasia. The dying necromancer clawed at the bolt sticking out of her throat, but didn't have the strength left to actually do anything about it. Emilia started to fall into a panic. There was no miracle for this, especially something that worked fast enough. She held her friend's hand as the life left the greenish turquoise eyes. "Wake up, tiny necromancer." Anastasia flinched awake. She tried to look around, but all she could see was white light. She could remember the bolt hitting her throat, but nothing after that. Did that asshole just kill me?" she asked, not exactly sure if she expected to get an answer or not. "That indeed appears to be the case. I can only apologize that our plan led to this," the seemingly disembodied voice said in a sad tone. Anastasia tried to look around for whoever was talking to her, but could only see white. Or that's what it felt like. It was entirely possible that she wasn't really seeing anything. "Who are you? And why can't I see anything?" she asked. "I am the goddess Sylvia. Your lack of sight is caused by your lack of devotion to me, not that I hold that against you," the voice revealed. Anastasia was skeptical of it at first, but figured that she was dead anyway, so might as well just go with it. "So you're real then, and Emilia isn't just an insane person. Why am I talking to you?" Anastasia couldn't feel or see her body, but somehow felt the warmth of something embracing her. "I took your soul from the flow," the goddess replied bluntly. Not knowing what the flow was, Anastasia continued her strategy of just going with the flow. Okay, and your part is not done yet. I am going to return the soul to your body. Sylvia explained slowly, like she was talking to a child. Maybe remove the bowl from my throat too. It's kind of important. Anastasia remarked snidely, slightly insulted by the patronizing tone. The goddess let out an audible sigh and continued. There's a slight issue though, my priestess is not listening to me. I need her to put the medallion on before I have the power to do what is needed. Well yeah, it's kind of shocking to see your friend get killed. The necromancer continued with the snide remarks. Are you one of those gods that have no idea how emotions work? After an even more sighing, Sylvia changed the subject. Almost like avoiding having to answer. You take death admirably well for someone as young as you. I have seen great kings and queens beg for the opportunity I am granting you. So why don't you just revive them left and right? Bet that would get you some prayer points or whatever. Anastasia asked. The nature of the flow. Sylvia started what was clearly a long and complicated explanation about a matter that Anastasia honestly didn't care about. Never mind then. How about we get on the problem at hand? What have you got to work with? She interrupted the goddess to get the conversation back on the rails. Her mind is a mess, but I can make my chosen one hear your words for a brief moment. You seem to have some talent in pestering people enough to make them listen to you. Sylvia suggested. Emilia was still holding on to her friend's hand. All her senses had gone dark, repeating the moment of Anastasia's death again and again. While the priestess was stunned, the paladins started to climb the stairs towards her. Did you really think you could abandon me to that jail without ever having to suffer from it? Well, now that shitty brat is dead and once I'm done here, I'll go visit old Eddie at the inn and make a rug out of that beast you tried to hide. Alex boasted and led the warriors even closer. She heard none of the idiots ranting and kept blaming herself for Anastasia's death. If it wasn't for her idiotic plan, she'd be still alive. Suddenly a deafening ringing noise woke her up. It felt like a cannon had been fired next to her ear. As the ringing died down, she could hear her friend's words in her head. Put the fucking medallion on, you ass. Hey Anna. Emilia asked and looked at her lifeless friend, who clearly hadn't said anything. Trying to figure out what had happened, she heard a second, far more comforting voice. You seem to have been woken, just give yourself to me and rest. Sylvia advised her chosen one. Suddenly everything seemed clear again. Emilia grabbed the medallion from the ground and hastily threw it on. A bright light blinded the paladins who were just about to reach the top. For a couple of hours, the streets of Crescent echoed songs more beautiful than what anyone had ever heard. They told of battles long past and genocides forgotten by mortal beings. The city was finally freed from the church's grasp, one paladin at a time. Anastasia woke up to the goddess's voice. With the deed done, her songs now told of peace and joy. Immediately upon realizing that she had been revived, Anastasia felt her bolt free throat and let out a sigh of relief. Do not remove the cover I have placed on your eyes. Concentrate and feel your surroundings, you will understand why. Sylvia said and stopped singing. Anastasia could feel every bit of viscera within her range. What oh shit. On the roofs too. Even the mental picture of it was too much, and she turned on her side and threw up on the church stairs. What the fuck happened to you being the goddess of joy or whatever? Sylvia giggled a bit. That is a relatively new aspect I chose. Before I was something else. Tiny Necromancer, I have something to ask of you. Could you keep watch over my chosen one? Sometimes the mortal world seems so far off and I can't directly guide my children. She pleaded. As if she had any other options, Anastasia accepted. Suppose that's fine, I used to be a goddess too, so I get what you mean. Yes, I am aware of the episode with the goblins. Perhaps that means that we will one day meet as equals. In your pocket, I have placed a note. Could you give it to the she-tiger? Do not mention it to my priestess or read it. The goddess asked, sounding a lot more cheerful than before. Anastasia searched her pocket and found a small note. It felt like any other piece of paper and certainly didn't seem holy in any way. What's in it? She asked, fully knowing she wouldn't get an answer. Do not worry about it. I am merely spreading joy to people. But it is about playing my part from this world. It has been interesting to talk with you. the goddess said and put her hand on Anastasia's chest. Anastasia could see a blinding flash even through her blindfold. Almost immediately after it was gone, she could feel Emilia hugging her hard enough for her breastplate to make breathing almost impossible. Emilia couldn't believe her friend was alive. "I'm so sorry this all happened. I'll never ask you to do anything for me again," she cried. "It's fine. Please let go, you're covered in blood," Anastasia said and tapped Emilia's back. The blood on the priestess's armor started to soak through her clothes. Emilia quickly let go. "Oh, so is everything else. Just keep that blindfold on until we leave the town. Let me take you back to the inn. I need to make an announcement to the people of Crescent later, but you probably should stay inside." As they walked down the stairs, Anastasia slipped on a bit of what used to be Alex, and rolled down into a pool of blood. The blindfold did nothing as the necromancer passed out and had to be rescued before she inhaled any of it. Chapter 29. Emilia carried the unconscious necromancer through the blood-soaked streets of Crescent. Pieces of the paladins and their armor were scattered everywhere. What had happened didn't mean the end of the whole church, but would limit their operations considerably, as none of the other temples around the world had gathered as much power, mostly due to local governing bodies not agreeing with their practices. There were some smaller kingdoms that shared the hatred for the non-human races, but the tyrannical nature of their leaders prevented the Church of Sylvia from growing beyond their control. Aside from a few braver citizens, the people of Crescent were still hiding in their dwellings, fearing that some kind of divine judgment had fallen upon them. They weren't exactly wrong. "Your Holiness." A young man, in his early 20s, sought answers and approached the priestess. "What happened? Has some unholy force targeted the city?" he asked and grabbed Emilia's sleeve. Emilia smiled gently and answered, "Quite the opposite, my child. The church itself was a cruel bastardization beyond saving. The deity it claimed to serve had to step down to our world and staunch the flames of its corruption." The man took a step back. "Our Lady Sylvia did this. This is the god we're supposed to worship," he uttered in confusion. "It was our own fault since we let it get this far. But Lady Sylvia knows that the people of this city are faithful to a fault, and will not let it happen again, for as long as there are people still following her. In the evening, gather as many people as you can and bring them to the central square. You will be given guidance there," Emilia instructed him. The man was clearly not content with the answer, but Emilia was sure that he would spread the word. It remained to be seen whether her audience would be an angry mob or a herd of lost people. More and more people came out to see what had happened. The misconception that something unholy was afoot spread quickly, and Emilia was surrounded by more and more believers, desperately seeking for answers. "You're the last member of the church in the city. Can you protect us?" a voice from the crowd asked. "Will this happen again?" added another one. "Are we safe?" The questions seemed endless, and for every person Emilia told to come to the central square, 2 more would appear. It took nearly 2 hours for them to get back to the inn. In a normal situation, it would have been a 5-minute walk. Emilia asked Edgar to bar the inn's door to get a moment of silence and peace. She went to the basement to put Anastasia down on her bed. "What the fuck did you do? Why are you covered in blood?" Rosie demanded answers. She was not happy that the two had been keeping her in the dark about the plan. She would have demanded a part in it, but lacked the combat abilities to protect herself against a horde of paladins, and having a beast folk with them would have gathered too much attention. "Are you two at least okay?" she asked and did her best to calm down. Emilia wiped off some of the blood on Anastasia's face. "Ah yeah. We're both fine now. I'll explain later. Anna has had a rough day. Could you get the bloody clothes off her and get her something fresh to wear? I need to prepare for a speech," she said, avoiding details. "Why does it have to be blood every damn time?" Anastasia muttered when she woke up, still feeling slightly nauseous. Rosie had taken the blindfold off her to wash the blood off her face. She dreaded to look down at her clothes and tried feeling whether they were still wet. "Huh. This isn't what I had on." "Emilia, did you try? How the fuck is your cloak clean again? It's not even stained." The priestess shrugged. She had been waiting for Anastasia to wake up. "It just kind of goes away. How are you feeling? I asked Rosie to change your clothes. She's upstairs, making us something to eat." She got up from the other bed and sat next to Anastasia. Could you not tell anyone that I got you killed? Gilbert and Rosie would probably kill me, she pleaded in a hushed voice. You didn't, it was that shithead with a crossbow. Everything aside from that happened because I did what I wanted to do, and would do again. Anastasia reassured her. There are times I'd rather be just a normal kid, but there are also times like this that make me happy to be what I am. There's no way you could have gotten the relics without me. Emilia looked at the necromancer's throat. There wasn't even a scar left. Are you sure you're okay? You'd think dying would have some impact on a person, she asked and touched the spot the arrow had hit. It did hurt, in case you're wondering. But after that, all I did was have a chat with Sylvia. Aside from the horrible massacre, she's lovely. Anastasia grinned. Emilia went silent for a second and stared at her friend. You spoke with her? She confirmed because Anastasia didn't seem to be joking. Anastasia explained what had happened in detail. The knowledge that someone had also interacted with Sylvia lifted a massive weight from her shoulders. There had always been a slight doubt in her heart that maybe she was just delusional like everyone said. Every miracle she had performed could just have been some leftover power from the holy mace she carried. But having someone else talk to the god and even get brought back from the dead proved that she could indeed speak with the divine. Now that I'm sort of indebted to her, do I need to join the fan club? With you being the leader and everything, maybe I can get some membership perks early on. The necromancer wondered. The goddess was obviously real and had an effect on the world, so worshipping her would give some guaranteed returns. No. You and everyone else who hangs around in the inn are too close to me, Emilia pointed out. I was told to seek companionship with people that have no relation to my lady. Having followers with me all the time would only narrow my view of the world. I need people to rein me in, as does everyone else who seeks to do good. After eating a well-needed meal, it was time for the speech. Emilia left her two friends at the inn and headed for the central square. Anastasia tried to find something to do, so she wouldn't have to think about her death. She went through her pockets and came across the note in her pocket. Hey Rosie. Sylvia asked me to give you this. She said it was only for you. I was going to read it, but sort of forgot. She tossed the neatly folded paper to Rosie. The tigress inspected the note before finally opening it. Gods leave notes now. What could she possibly wow? Rosie read the note again. She mouthed the words, but Anastasia couldn't quite read her lips. Anastasia tried to peek at the text, but Rosie quickly stuffed the paper into her pocket. What? Is it something funny? Tell me, she demanded. Rosie pushed the curious teen away. No. Maybe by the time you're 50, you might be ready for it, but I'm not promising anything, she said in a serious tone. Screw you and that divine tart. I'm not a kid anymore, Anastasia protested. The square was still caked with blood and bits of paladins. On hindsight, Emilia, though she may have picked the wrong place for the gathering. Though the whole city was covered in blood, there must have been a place that didn't have 50 or so corpses lying around. People started to slowly gather to the square. The lack of pitchforks and torches calmed the priestess down slightly. It didn't take long for the square and the surrounding streets to fill up with hundreds of people, though it was nowhere near all who wanted to meet the priestess. It would have to do. Emilia cleared her throat and started the speech. People of Crescent, first and foremost I would like to apologize that it took so long for me to arrive. 2 years ago, this could have been done without bloodshed and carnage, but as the chosen of Sylvia, I was not ready. I heard many people express their concern about how this might be some unholy attack on the church or the city, but do not worry, it was my Our Lady Sylvia who rid this beautiful city of its disease. Too long had the church here oppressed its followers, demanding tributes and subjugating entire races of people. However, those times are now over, and we are free to express our faith how it was meant to. An old man came forth from the crowd and interrupted the priestess. You're saying that this was done by Lady Sylvia, the goddess of joy? The man doubted. I saw the beast rampage through the streets. It was without a doubt a demon. Claws covered in blood of the paladins, horns sharpened on bone and armor, fertile body to tempt the men of faith with, and wings of fire. That was no goddess of joy. A few others who claimed to have seen a demon came forth to support the old man. And the songs. A voice so enchanting that the paladins just walked to their deaths in the hands of the beast. I'm lucky that my wife was able to stop me from going outside too. Someone shouted. Emilia was confused. She had never seen the goddess clearly, but that didn't sound right at all. First of all, it was her body that the goddess had taken a hold of, and Anastasia didn't mention anything about a demon. She had to figure something out to calm the crowd. That may have been what you saw, but the divine are without material forms in this world. Perhaps it was just a vessel suitable for the deed of cleansing the city of corruption, was what she came up with. The explanation divided the crowd in two. Half didn't seem to care what a goddess looked like. All that mattered was her actions and intent behind them, and indeed, the church had been trampling over its followers. The other half couldn't get over the description. In addition, there was a third, smaller group, whose view on the matter was explained very well by one of its members. I'll worship some fiery tits. They bring me joy more than anything. Emilia thought that these people were dumbasses, but it's not like that wasn't a valid reason for worship. In fact, Sylvia would probably favor these people for their attitude towards life. The city may have been divided, but the situation wasn't explosive. Emilia explained that Sylvia didn't care for temples or donations. All she needed was that everyone kept a small statue or shrine for her in their home or some gathering place, and remembered her in times of great joy. Even the people that believed that the city had been attacked by a demon didn't abandon their faith. The next problem would be getting a priest or a priestess for the city. Emilia didn't want to stay in the city forever, and Sylvia needed someone who could offer guidance for the people in her name, and keep the situation between the factions from getting worse. And of course, cleaning up the city, the rotting flesh would start to smell soon enough. Chapter 30. What? I can't believe you doubt the high priestess like that. If she says that Lady Sylvia carried out the cleanse, that's how it must be. No one but the paladins and priests got killed after all. I find it hard to believe a demon would limit its rampage like that, argued a man who had accepted Emilia's explanation. He had been tired of the church's oppressive ways for a while now. That's exactly what one would do. They seek to destroy all that's holy. The high priestess is simply trying to calm the masses. Look, I was no fan of the way the church operated either, but I wouldn't call them corrupt, responded the man on the opposite side of the bar table. The relations between the two factions of the new Church of Sylvia were slowly getting tense. There had been a couple of fistfights between drunken followers, but that wasn't exactly uncommon with or without religious debates. Nevertheless, Emilia needed to figure out something that both sides of the argument would agree on. I'm doing a terrible job, aren't I? She muttered with her hand on her face. She, Anastasia and Rosie were sitting at a corner table in Edgar's Inn. Demons aren't even real. I guess some of the more chaotic gods could be called that, but even they aren't unholy beasts. They're the same type of being, we just don't worship them. My lady doesn't even have enemies among them. Anna, you didn't happen to get a glimpse of her or anything? Emilia turned to her friend, trying to make sense of the situation. Like I said, I was blindfolded the whole time. I know it was because of the blood, but to be honest, it kind of makes it seem like she had something to hide, Anastasia said while rubbing her throat. The newly promoted high priestess sighed and buried her face in her arms. I wouldn't be too worried though. Shouldn't gods be able to look like whatever they want? Maybe she just wanted to be scary for the occasion. Also, I take my guidance from a lady who has 6 skeleton hands and gets washed by prostitutes, and from her friend, who I assume kills hundreds of people for his research. What I'm trying to say is that if your goddess happens to have some horns and offed a few scumbag paladins, it's not really that bad by our standards. The necromancer continued. Rosie put her hand on Emilia's head. She had been hiding in the basement for the whole time, and it annoyed her to no end. For the tiger folk, hiding from their enemies instead of fighting was downright shameful. But Rosie also knew that this was way beyond her abilities. She had no powers of any kind, nor any angry deities looking after her. She just cooked food and acted tough to drunken idiots. There had to be a way she could help. What if you just say ambiguous shit like every damn fake religion? Not that yours is fake, the tigress said jokingly. Like, it's not for us to know how the divine work, or some shit. Emilia lifted her head. Anyone looking at her could hear the gears turn inside her head as she went through different scenarios. That might actually work. Rosie, you're a genius and I love you. Emilia shouted as she suddenly cheered up. The priestess kissed Rosie on the cheek and stormed outside. I think it's nice how you guys are friends now. She used to be afraid of you, you know, Anastasia remarked, displaying near legendary amounts of naivety. On the way to the central square, Emilia stopped everyone she came across and told them to gather some more people and come to the square. While waiting for the square to fill up again, the high priestess decided to check out whether the temple could be used by the new church. As soon as she opened the door, the smell of carnage hit her. Unlike the streets, the temple had very little ventilation, allowing the stench to grow stronger. The broken window above the door helped a little, but it was still one of the worst things Emilia had ever smelled. Inside lied the bodies of the paladins that had challenged Anastasia. Many of them had died from their injuries from the fight, but others were mauled to pieces, no doubt by the goddess. Help, anyone help. Emilia heard a faint voice from behind the altar. At first, she thought that someone had gotten stuck in the temple during the massacre, and were now scared out of their minds. She wasn't wrong, technically. Help, please, no. Not you. Anyone but you. The old high priest yelled in panic as he dragged himself away from Emilia. You brought demons into this city. It is your fault that everyone is dead. Take my gold and leave. Please, he continued to plead as he threw whatever jewelry he had at Emilia. Quit it, old man. I'm not interested in your knick-knack. First of all, everyone is fine. It's just you and your rotten cult that has been destroyed. Secondly, there are no demons. The small one is a friend of mine, a very sweet and honest girl, and the second is the goddess whose name you have defiled. And lastly, I don't even know why I'm telling you this. Emilia explained while grabbing onto her mace. The cleanse is complete. My dearest child, go outside to confront your flock, while I purify this nest of wretchedness. As soon as Emilia closed the door behind herself, the temple burst into flames. The square was almost as full as it was during the first gathering. Some arguing could be heard, but the appearance of the high priestess silenced them. Anastasia and Rosie were waiting near the stairs and waved as their friend noticed them. Please ignore the burning temple, it's now empty and the fire is under control. Let's talk about what happened today. We can all agree that the church was oppressive and needed to be changed, am I correct? And now something has gone through the city and done it the hard way, but what? This is where our problem lies. Perhaps it was Our Lady herself. Perhaps it was a demon that was later banished by her. Perhaps this or that. After having tried my best to usher forth an explanation, I realized that perhaps it's just not for us to know. Endless theories could be constructed on the matter, but how to prove one to be correct? All that matters is that Our Lady Sylvia is watching over us. So let us bury the hatchet on this and look for a way to rebuild the church as what it was supposed to be, Emilia declared using all of her spare charisma. The crowd stayed silent for an awkwardly long time. Long enough for Emilia to start thinking her cop-out of a speech didn't have any impact. Eventually the same old man from the last gathering came out of the group. I see what you mean, Your Holiness. For as long as we have faith in Lady Sylvia, she will protect us from the beast. The old man figured while stroking his beard. Among other things, yes. Her blessings shall be granted to this great city, like back before the church had not gone so far astray, Emilia explained. She was glad she got through to this group of followers in particular, as they were the most likely to cause trouble with the others. Are you going to stay with us, Your Holiness? We need a leader to guide us so we don't go astray again, the old man said while pointing at the burning temple. At first, I thought so too, but ours is not a church in need of much organization. In fact, I feel like having clergy would distance us from Lady Sylvia. She doesn't require complex rituals or services to feel your devotion. At times of doubt, seek guidance from your fellow believers and not someone who claims to have absolute understanding of our goddess, as there isn't anyone like that. So no, I fear I cannot stay as too many of you would be influenced by my views, Emilia declared and shook her head, feigning sadness. The divine mission given to her by her goddess was to return the power to the people and stabilize the situation afterwards. As she was just a young priestess with no experience being a leader, she was in way over her head trying to organize a religion for an entire city full of people. So the best she could do was to give them the freedom to figure it out for themselves, and now that the corrupt church was no longer hindering their faith, Sylvia could more directly guide them as she pleased. The crowd started to slowly disperse, and Amelia's friends came to congratulate her for her successful cop-out. As they were sitting on the stairs, a group of maybe 20 people, consisting mostly of young men, approached them. "Miss Priestess, we were one of the men," started before getting interrupted. "No, there will be no breasts here today. If you missed them earlier, you just have to search your heart, and maybe you'll find them again," Amelia said while rubbing her brow. "But he tried to insist. "No," the priestess yelled in disgust.